Hello, everybody. It is Dan Tomaszewski here with Everything MSP. I hope you're all having a great day today. Steve and I were just talking about the weather a little bit here. Here in Michigan, we have a wonderful 66-degree day going on. Unlike Steve has got, what did you say, 87?
87 right now, yeah.
87. That's incredible. So today we have a very important topic that we're going to talk about: managing threat response. And very excited and honored to have Steve Weber from Sophos. Steve is a global solutions engineer on the MSP side. And one really cool thing about Steve is he was a former MSP just for a few years, right?
Yeah, just a few, about 16 to 18 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to the mark where you're like, all right, I need to get into something different, right?
Yeah, needed some new challenges.
There you go. So cybersecurity keeping you busy?
Absolutely. Yeah, the bad guys never rest. There's always something new to protect against. And there's always a lot of partners that we need to onboard and talk to.
Yeah, and it's I mean, day by day, it's providing more and more challenges for us in the industry, and that's why we're here today. We want to learn a little bit more from you. Part of our main topic is talking about what are some of those active approaches to cybersecurity for our clients. And one of the things that Steve is going to walk us through and help us to better understand is the protection options and services available to us as MSPs that can help better secure our customers from those threats, and just nonstop. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve. And Steve, what we'll do is we'll have some questions at the end. So anybody, if you have questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat, and then we'll grab those right at the end of our event here. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll go from here.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so introductions aside, Steve Weber, Global Solutions Engineer. So I've been with Sophos now for 6 years. As we saw in there, coming from the MSP space prior to getting into with Sophos. Really got drawn into Sophos because I was dealing with those cybersecurity threats that all of you are seeing on a day-to-day basis. And Sophos was one of my products that I was using to safeguard against these threats. So it really became a natural transition for me to move into the sales engineering and now the solutions engineering components for the MSP program here at Sophos. So for those of you that don't know Sophos, I just want to give a little bit of a background of who we are. We have been in this space since 1985. We've started as an endpoint company, as a traditional AV component. We have since grown and built out a platform called Sophos Central. This is our security management tool, which also has SecOps threat hunting built right into it. This tool houses an extensive library of products here at Sophos, from our endpoint, mobile device management, device encryption, firewall, XDR and EDR, which are terms I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Also managing our hardware appliances from the firewall access point, and recently including our services, our managed threat response service and our rapid response, which is an incident response service. All of this is built on top of our threat intelligence, which starts with Sophos Labs, also goes into our Sophos AI team, as well as our Security Operations Center. So just a little bit of a background of who we are and what we do today. So what I wanted to talk about today, we're going to go through 4 different topics here. One, to start by going through and taking a look at what we're seeing as far as the threats in the environments, how the bad guys are operating, and how are they changing their tactics. I want to talk briefly about the protections that you need to have inside of your environment. We all know that you need to have some sort of a protection on there. This next component with the investigative tools is really getting to the point of not only do you need this protection, but you need to understand what's going on. I think we've all heard this term: cybersecurity is not a spectator sport. You need to be actively involved in it. And last, we will talk about the incident response. What do you do if, in fact, you are under attack? So getting into this and starting out, we're going to talk a bit about the bad guys here. And the bad actors are definitely out there. They're constantly evolving their game, their tactics. They're constantly shifting. Now, the biggest thing out there is ransomware. Ransomware has become big business. But ransomware we're seeing is starting to take a little bit of a shift. And you can see this if you look in the news. Obviously, Coastal Pipeline, everybody is hopefully well aware of that one. Bad guys are shifting to more of an approach where they're more of an active adversary. They're not more just a spectator where, hey, if the AV blocks them, that's the end of it and they can't go any further. They can now, through automation and manual intervention, take and pivot. If they see that a process has gotten blocked, if they've gotten into there, they can see, okay, maybe AV or something stepped in and blocked them. They can then pivot to a different routine, hopefully getting themselves to that spot where they can now encrypt the network. Now, hopefully we can protect against all of this. We don't want anybody to have ransomware inside of their environment. If you have ever had to deal with it, it is not a pleasant experience. When we start to talk about these active adversaries, when an adversary gets into a network, and this could be from anything, they put phishing emails out there, they do reconnaissance, active and passive attacks against either targeted organizations or groups of organizations. And the goal is to land on a device. And it really doesn't matter what device they land on. That device is probably not what they are after. And then they will start probing around this network. We've seen this before with Target in the past. They got compromised through their AC vendor, so a supply chain attack. The vendors that you're using can also affect your business as well. They were able to get in through an IoT device controlling an AC and compromise that network. So that's probing and looking for where can they go. Once they get in, they gain access, utilizing techniques such as exploits, credential theft, things that they can do to make sure they can elevate their permission and move laterally in the environment. Ultimately, they want to have persistence. They want to maintain a foothold and also gain a foothold on other devices as well. And this could be simply as putting components into scheduled processes, into startup groups, or code caving applications that are used often and putting those in places where other users may click on them. At the end of the day, they want to escape without a trace, remove any reference other than that ransomware note, letting you know that you have been attacked and your data may or may not have been encrypted depending on your protections. And what this leaves you with as the MSP and the customer is an active crime scene. Now, at this point, you have the alerts, you have the notices, or you have a ransom note out there, and you need to figure out what to do with that note. And what we want to do is walk through one of our casebooks, and we have many. If you go to news.sophos.com, you can find a lot of our managed threat response casebooks out there. But this is one that we have that we highlight. And this particular attack, if we see here, happened on Sunday. This was a ransomware attack deployed out to 700 devices with a ransom note on there for 15 million. Thankfully, that was blocked. The InterceptX product for Sophos stepped in, was able to block that. The admins didn't see their alerts, unfortunately, until Monday. And that's when they started to engage with our incident responders. They were able to, again, now reach out to someone, have them go in and figure out what happened inside of their environment. Where did this attack come from? Those incident responders were now able to identify which accounts were used, tools that were used during the attack, command lines, C2 components on there, and were able to say with great certainty that this was a Maze Group break-in that got in via RDP, and they started to conduct some recon inside of the environment. They had privilege escalation components in there that were detected but were not actioned upon. And we'll talk about that here in a minute as well. So they were in the network for about 2 or 3 days here, and then all of a sudden you see that there is no communication going on with it. It looks like they're just sitting and waiting. They've gone quiet. And the reason for this, and most of these active adversaries will do this, is they're sitting and waiting for that opportune time to strike. If this is Thursday, Friday, any day during the week where you have active users and admins in an environment, it's less likely that their attack is going to be unnoticed. The first person who gets ransomware is going to cry wolf, or the first notices on their machine, and bad guys don't want that. Now, in this case, Sunday, they delivered their ransom. It was blocked. And what we saw, and this is typical for a bad guy, remember that first slide we saw, they will pivot. So on this environment, they noticed that their ransomware, they weren't getting that call out, they weren't getting the encryption on there. They then pivoted. They still had access into the system using different methods. Those methods that they were using to get in the system to try to deploy additional ransomware attacks, which we saw 2 of on Wednesday, were neutralized by the incident responders, and having that 24/7 monitoring on that system. And by Thursday, so we're 9 days into where the attacker started to where we now have them off of the network, and we have this customer transitioned into a 24/7 ongoing monitoring component. And that ongoing monitoring component is really the most important piece on there. Yes, we can see that the endpoint protection software did its job. The endpoint protection software also on Tuesday through Thursday here gave us indicators of compromise through alerts that there was a privilege escalation, but there was no monitoring. There was no incident response that happened to understand, was this an isolated incident or was this part of something bigger? So this all could have been avoided if those alerts were actioned upon inside of that environment. So shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about how do we protect against this? And this is really getting into that protection component. And this all starts with endpoint. And I know this is not only endpoint, but we are talking about the actual devices themselves. Obviously, you need your firewalls, you need your mobile security, but with the actual endpoint itself, you need to have a good endpoint protection in place to defend against these attacks. For us here at Sophos, that is Intercept X. What you need to have is a endpoint software that understands and can identify components during an attack chain. Most attack chains inside of an attacker's repertoire of what they're doing to deploy out to an environment contain 2 or more different exploit techniques. And oftentimes those will be triggered upon. They will be stopped along the way. And again, remember, we saw they will come in there, they'll get a foothold, they'll try many of their automated approaches, and then if need to, they will pivot manually to where they can get to something they can then hopefully from their side of it deliver some ransomware. If we take a look at a traditional AV, you're looking at that on disk or in memory, something has to drop onto there. We need to understand what's happening before it gets to that point, and then even after that, when we have that ransomware activity and behavior. Now, the exploit techniques that we see in an environment, this is simply just a way in which an attacker can abuse software or hardware vulnerabilities in an environment to make the computer do something that it shouldn't. And there are a ton of vulnerabilities out there. If we take a look at this from a patching perspective of vulnerable applications, there are thousands per year. If we take a look at the public known exploits, there are hundreds per year. At Sophos, we look at the exploit techniques, which there are literally only about 26, 27 known techniques out there, and there's only about 1 or 2 new techniques each year. This is a very small component. And these exploit techniques have to be used to compromise these vulnerable applications. So if you understand the techniques that are being used, you can safeguard against those attacks, against those vulnerable applications. We also have to ensure that we're protecting against ransomware. For us, this is our CryptoGuard and our WipeGuard technology, protecting the files on those systems, making sure that if something happens on there, we detect the behavior of ransomware, that we can quickly go into action, block that ransomware component, and revert those files back to a known good state, or protect the disk and boot volumes from being compromised. In those active adversary attacks, there'll often be a credential theft. This is where the bad guy is going to try to, gain access to the local passwords or hash to then elevate their permission and then allow them to move laterally. They may use techniques such as code caving, hiding bits of code into other applications, which allows them to avoid detection. Obviously, if we see a known application that is running but also executing other code, that may not be picked up by a normal admin in the environment. And then the application procedures calls, which we've seen these used time and time again with WannaCry, NotPetya via the Eternal Blue exploits. So with all of these detections, all of these indicators, now with your endpoint software, you have to have that protection in place, but these are also going to lead you to your indicators of compromise for your environments. If you got a notice of a credential theft or a code cave or some sort of a malicious activity that was blocked in the environment, you can't just take that alert and say, yep, it was blocked. I don't need to pay any attention to this. You need to understand where this came from. And this starts to get into these investigative tools that we need for these environments. Not only do we need to have those signals, those indicators of compromise and indicators of attack, the detection, the machine learning components on there, need to be able to observe these events, be able to understand what they are doing inside of the environment and make a decision. Is this good or bad? Is this malicious or benign? Where did this come from? And then if needed, take action to remediate those problems inside of an environment. This starts to bring us into some tools that we use here, which is called XDR. These are tools that we provide to our Sophos partners to bring additional information and context to these threats, to these detections, and allow you to respond to them quickly. For those of you who are not familiar with the term XDR, Gartner here coins this as an XDR product is set to improve the security operations, productivity, and enhance the detection and response capabilities by including more security components into a unified whole, multiple streams of telemetry presented in that tool. And that's exactly what the XDR tool does. It's collecting data from all of your Windows services, logins, components, patches in the environment. It's taking that data from your endpoint detection software, from your firewall, from your cloud offerings. If you're using AWS or Azure and you have our cloud optics tools in there to understand those environments, it brings all of those together so that you have those detections in one place. You can do a proactive search or threat hunt across all of those tools from one dashboard and then quickly respond to those incidents. The XDR tools allow you to investigate not only detections that you've seen in the environment. If you are pulling information from other sources, you have other sources, indicators of compromise, other sources that are giving you hashes or IOCs you need to look at, you can definitely do those threat hunts across your environment, and it's across multiple products. You don't have to go log into each one of those products and understand what is happening with that product. Where did anything come from? And this could also be integrating with email that we're seeing. So researching phishing emails coming in, comparing header information or hashes, again, another IOC information from malicious domains. XDR also allows you to take that back in time. So not only do we want to be able to investigate what's going on right now, we have a detection or we've seen something or we have a new indicator of compromise, but be able to take that back in time through history. And we can see up to 90 days worth of history on those devices with the XDR. So if you do see an indicator of compromise or an attack in an environment, you can then take that back across all of your customers to then ensure that nothing was seen across them. Again, the goal is to be able to take that back, see what's happened previous days, and then put a stop to that. Start the remediation process. Identify those suspicious files, those suspicious connections to an environment. This tool also has some focuses on just basic IT needs in there as well, as we are pulling all of this information from the Windows endpoint. So we can have it used for simple IT tasks, such as finding a Office application that's running slow. What's going on with it? What's it connecting to? What application is causing this traffic inside of an environment? So it really does allow us to go in and see a full picture of what's going on with those threats inside of an environment.
Now, Steve, if you don't mind me jumping in here. This is some pretty incredible stuff to be able to go back and look at, especially the depth of, the depth that you're going back and discovering. A lot of times trying to find, what's happening or what's happened is needle in a haystack. does this give a much quicker way to be able to go back and review and see where there's some significant information that is needed to be able to make some changes and remediate?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole beauty of, the XDR tools that are available. Because you have all that data coming into one location and you have your detections, you have your indicators of compromise, you can then chain those together. Hey, I'm looking for this component here. Where did this link to inside of that organization? And then have that brought out into a nice report as to this is what happened. These are the processes, services, connections that it made inside of that environment, and then follow those right back through that chain. Very quickly and easily. We do offer a guided response in there as well. So when you're at a point in time, we'll give you a drop down. Hey, what else can you do from here? What else should you be doing from here as well? These tools are designed for your threat hunters. So these tools are designed to be as simple as possible, but it still requires an MSP to understand, basic threat hunting, indicators of compromise. So it's the tools that those teams will use.
Excellent. Thank you.
And that actually is a good segue right into the next component on here. Because as we're talking here with this slide, you've got your protection in place, you've got your detection and response. If you decide to do that yourself with the XDR, and just as we saw, that could be a lot of information there. You have to know how to hunt that back. What are you looking for inside of that environment? And that starts to come into that managed detection and response, MDR. Which we at Sophos call managed threat response. And what this is this is an outsourced cybersecurity service designed to protect your data and assets, even if threats elude any common organizational security controls. So anything that you have in place is designed to monitor those threats and protect against them. The goal is to protect against attacks and proactively secure known vulnerabilities inside of an environment. And this is all done as a service. So you don't have to have these IT admins these threat hunters inside of your environment that are spending the time and spending their cycles on this. You can get back to actually doing what you do best as an MSP, providing more services to your customers. This team also will go through, again, detect any of those attacks inside of an environment, identify any potential malicious behaviors, and then bring that to an investigation for response and remediation. So this is one of the biggest components with us at Sophos, is the fact that we don't only protect, we don't only give you the detection component, but we also will respond to that as well. And if we take a look at a traditional approach to this kind of threat hunting, and this applies to the XDR as well as our managed threat response as well, if you have siloed products out there, so product A, product B, and C, those all have individual management consoles. To get the data consolidated from those, you're gonna have to take event log data, you're gonna have to bring that into some sort of a SIEM that's gonna bring that data consolidation together. That data is going to then have to be reviewed. And this is oftentimes, and it's funny that you brought that up, but this is oftentimes where we see that term needle in a haystack when we talk about a SIEM or a syslog. It's a ton of data. Yes, you can absolutely program in some points on there to say, hey, bring these things that I have found to my attention. And that's really what we start to see when we have MDR, is they're taking that data and bringing in those automated components to hunt against those different tools. The incident responder, though, is now going to have 3 different products and 3 different consoles that they're going to have to investigate against and respond against inside of those environments. And that's if they offer those response and incident response components on there. The beauty of how we simplify this at Sophos is we have the endpoint, we have the firewall, the server protection, the cloud management, the email. We have all those indicators coming into a single Sophos Central instance. So either through that XDR tool, hunting yourself, or through the Sophos MTR or Managed Threat Response, you can have an automated action to that. You have 24/7 monitoring to detect those problems in your environment, anything malicious, investigate and respond to them, and then notify you as the MSP as to what is going wrong. So a couple of scenarios that we see most often when we start talking about a managed threat response or a managed detection and response. The first scenario here is we have the tools in place. The tools detect a suspicious attack or behavior inside of an environment. They know enough about that attack that they're able to take automated corrective response against that particular attack. At this point, everything has been taken care of. Nobody needs to get involved. In scenario two, the tools detect an attack and we have suspicious behavior, but the tools don't have enough information to automate a response to that attack or behavior in the environment. And this is where an analyst needs to step in and conduct investigations, determine whether or not this attack is malicious, benign. And most times when we see MDR services, and this is definitely shifting, everybody's understanding you have to have instant response as well. But MDR as a tradition would stop at this point here, understanding what happened, investigating that, and letting you know what you need to do to resolve that. Where we take that to an extra step is you want to be able to also have an incident responder go in, understand what's going on, create a plan for that, and then lead those remediation actions and help create future playbooks to automate that detection and response in the future. The last scenario that we see out there is that the tools don't detect anything. There is no suspicious behavior. There's no indicators of compromise inside of the environment. So there is nothing that can be done from an automated response component. And this is where threat hunters and analysts need to take indicators of compromise, things that they've seen in the wild, and use those to threat hunt against a customer's environment. This is that proactive approach to it, making sure that we know what's going on, making sure we're constantly looking for suspicious behavior, making sure we're looking for those indicators of attack and compromise, making sure that if we detect something, we can follow through with it. Again, this is all part of that managed threat response, understanding what's going on in your environment, having that 24/7 component of management on that system. So again, here at Sophos, this is called managed threat response. It is our 24/7 team of global responders who are proactively hunting against your environments, taking all of that data from the endpoints, whether that's Windows or Mac, the Sophos endpoint on there, the firewall, your mobile devices, the cloud components that you have in there with AWS, Azure, or Google Clouds, bringing that all in and understanding what's going on with that so they can take action and report to you what's going on, giving you proactive defense, transparency, and control over that process inside of your customer environments. So MTR is not a 100% human-led component, and it's not a 100% machine-led component. We're combining the best of both the machine and the human response elements on there. As you can see with number one, as we talked about before, it all starts with that protection level, making sure that we have the best protection on the device. We can get additional indicators of compromise. Using machine learning to prioritize those suspicious activities in an environment, and if they can confirm that activity, take automated action to terminate that before handing that off to a threat analyst for further investigation. And this is where additional threat hunts will be conducted to find additional threats inside of that environment that may meet these certain criteria or find new threats. And again, bring that to the customer to neutralize. See, we have a plan to get them back into a working state and report on what happened inside of those environments. So really when this comes down to it, and if we remember back to that original ransomware investigation we saw earlier, that was over the course of 5 days that the bad guy was in an environment, and they delivered that. And on day 5, day 6 is when the incident responders were brought in. They were able to then start to take action immediately inside of those environments. And within a couple of days, they had everything resolved on there. When we're talking about incident response, yes, some of those things do take upwards of a day or two to get to a full resolution. When we're looking at this from a managed threat response, if we had that monitoring in place during those 5 days, the average detection time on there for our team is about 2 minutes. Again, if we had those indicators of compromise, we had the escalation or privilege escalation inside of an environment which went unactioned inside of there. It was simply, yes, this was blocked, and it was ignored after that. That would have been followed up on. The typical response time on there would have been about 20 minutes, and the typical time to resolve is around 60 minutes inside of the environment. So taking it from a 9 days total that the bad guy was in the environment and that the company had to deal with this ongoing threat to be able to resolve that in most cases in under an hour. This also comes with a whole set of reports, and we make sure that our MSPs and our customers understand what is going on, understand the detections that they're seeing inside of the environment and how we're seeing those attacks come in. As you can see in the middle of the screen here under the detection classification, phishing attempts, brute force, keylogger. That first one on there, quite a few phishing attempts. So this to me as an MSP would indicate that I need some more education around phishing attempts for these users. We want to make sure we have a good training methodology in place so that these attacks don't ever make it in the front door. They know how to spot that phish and report on it before actually clicking and bringing a bad guy into the environment. So we do this on a monthly and a weekly basis so that we can keep our partners, our customers, depending on who we are talking to, whoever the contact is for that particular account, in the know as to what's going on, what's active inside of the environments. And bring it back to this slide here. Again, we've got the protection component on there. We have the Intercept X on there for Sophos. Now, again, if you do something else, absolutely whatever your component is in here, you need that protection. That detection and response, there are two components to this. You can either get the tools to do this yourself, whether that's the Sophos XDR, whether you're going to use third-party EDR and XDR tools to bring all of that data together. That's going to allow you to do those threat hunts if you have the resources in your environment. If you don't have those resources, that's where you need to look for a managed threat response or a managed detection and response service. Essentially, this is usually a SOC as a service kind of offering where you're going to go in and understand what's happening inside of those environments to ensure that they are protected. So the last thing to talk about here is incident response. We've talked about the protection. We've talked about the 24/7 monitoring that you absolutely should have in place. But what happens if you get attacked? What happens if you are maybe running the protection, but you are not monitoring those environments? What do you do next? Do you have the resources as the MSP to be able to handle those incidents, to be able to find that bad guy, where they came into that environment, how long they spent into there, and what tools they were using during that attack? Incident response has become a very big component of Sophos. It has led to many, many deals for not only our Sophos customers that are not utilizing all of the latest tools and technologies, but we have a ton of non-Sophos customers as well that come to us just for the incident response. Sometimes they stay with Sophos afterward, they shift over, but again, it's not a mandatory thing at this point in time. You can bring it in and have us incident response against your environment and then put it on a 24/7 monitoring. And at Sophos, we call this rapid response. This is a lightning fast service against active threats inside of an environment led by an expert team of global incident responders. This team normally onboards a customer within hours. Obviously, there's a sales component to this that gets done very quick. Then we have the customer onboarded again within hours, and the majority of the customers are triaged and back into a good working state. Bad guys kicked out of their environments within about 48 hours. The goal of rapid response is to, again, get onboarded, deploy our services in there, provide a kickoff call to establish communication with the customer or partner to determine what have you done, what remediation steps have you taken so far, identify the scale and impact of that attack inside of that environment, and then collaborate with the MSP or customer to get to a response, to neutralize the threats inside of that environment. want to be able to remove the attackers, stop any further damage, prevent any data from exfiltrating and leaving the environment, and provide any real-time preventative actions to the root cause. Obviously, in the case of the one we saw earlier, it came in through RDP. That absolutely, and all of us already know this, you absolutely should not be running RDP open to the internet. You're just asking for trouble at that point in time. And then monitoring. So transitioning from neutralizing those threats into a monitoring, a 24/7 monitoring service. We do ship all of our rapid response customers into our managed threat response for 90 days to give them ongoing threat components, threat hunting inside of their environment. As we saw, bad guys will pivot. There is a chance that a bad guy will try and attack again. They either have the tools in place, maybe something that was not detected, or they know what sort of phishing attacks work against that environment. What will somebody click on? Therefore, having that service for that 24/7 monitoring is crucial. All right, so all of this starts to lead into what we do at Sophos, which is our Sophos Adaptive Cybersecurity Ecosystem. You're going to see a lot more vendors starting to tout this, cybersecurity, not as a siloed product, but more as an ecosystem. Essentially, it's with everything working together. That's why we have expanded our portfolio. That's why we are no longer just that endpoint company. We have the endpoint, the server protection, the email, the encryption, the firewall, all of those products sharing data, sharing threat intelligence information, bubbling that up inside of the Sophos Central dashboards to bring that into that XDR component for the threat hunting or those services for that managed threat response. We do all of this by housing that information inside of a data lake for the XDR component and allow you to have access to that data. Again, 90 days worth of data inside of that data lake that you can then go back and hunt against. We also have our open APIs into Sophos Central as well. This allows any administrators or security operation teams to automate these threat hunts against Sophos as well. If they don't want to utilize our tools, you have your own tools. You can build against the APIs to allow you to control those threat hunts and information from your own consoles via the APIs as well. All right, so with that in the environment, if there are any questions, happy to answer those, go into a bit of a discussion as to what we're seeing here.
Yeah, we do have one question from JB. He wants to know how easy is 24/7 monitoring to set up on a client site? And then he also asks, are agents deployed on each device? Can this service be used as part of an annual or biannual pen test?
So we are not a pen tester. I'll get to that one first. We do not have any pen testing tools. We are not going to provide that. You should absolutely still find a company that can pen test your environments. As far as deployment goes, it is a single agent for Sophos, which is really where this starts to get nice. The endpoint agent and the MTR, the managed threat response agent on there is a component. It is a single agent that deploys out to the device within minutes. And at that point, all of that data is starting to be collected inside of that data lake for those threat teams to then start to act upon. So as far as how quickly can you get set up on there, it's how fast can you install the software on those devices. With RMM tools out there, with under an hour, and as you can see on there, we get installed on devices with our incident response within hours. So within a couple of hours, you can have all devices protected and reporting into a managed threat response service for 24/7 monitoring.
Excellent. So as today's cybersecurity threat landscape just continues to intensify, can an MSP realistically manage the security for their clients without these type of advanced tools and services like Sophos and others are providing?
So it is becoming a more complicated landscape out there. I would say if you are just doing the bare minimum of endpoint protection on a device, you are doing yourself a disservice. As we've seen in the news over and over again, MSPs are a big target for these attackers. The attackers know that you typically will have, RMM tools and remote access into other customers. So just having endpoint detection on there, not monitoring those components, is really not enough. As to whether or not you can do this yourself, that is really going to be based off of, can you take the tools? Do you have the personnel that you can dedicate to a security approach for your organization? Some partners absolutely can do this. We do have those MSPs and MSSPs out there that run their own security operations centers. They take the tools such as the XDR components from the Intercept X and bring that into their product for advanced threat hunting. If you do not have this, and we do see this across many of our MSP partners as well, if you don't have those people on staff, you don't have that 24/7 SOC set up, then absolutely you can go into that service realm. And that's, again, with Sophos, with any other vendor out there, you really should start to consider those services.
Excellent. The pandemic, as we all know, really shifted things to work from home in a very, very fast way, right? So fast that we weren't really prepared to be able to properly set everybody up, right? Given the fact that they're working from home and we don't know what those environments necessarily look like. We are seeing that some organizations are bringing some of their staff back into the office, but I think the work from anywhere, methodology is not going to go anywhere. And it's going to continue to provide us with more, just put us in that position where there's going to be more vulnerabilities. And, we're just going to be in environments that we just don't have the control over. So where do you see that going, and what things need to be done to protect our clients in a work from anywhere type of scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. Us Sophos, we did get affected by this. Thankfully, we had a large percentage of our workforce, such as myself, that was already remote. So we already had a lot of these components in place to start. But for a lot of organizations, as you said, this was just kind of a rapid, mad dash to how do we get people to be able to work from home so you don't shut down the entire business. And a lot of that meant oftentimes cutting some corners or doing things quick just to get people access, and then coming back and shoring that up later. You are seeing that some of those components that would be traditionally in an environment like a firewall, so multiple layers of protection, are missing because it is a home environment. We don't know what they have going on inside of there. We don't know what their home environment looks like, what other devices they have on there, or what they're going to be plugging into those endpoints as well. So this really starts to bring in, and the same thing here at Sophos, we are starting to bring people back to the office, but we are starting to have options out there as well for people to work from home and work from the office for a few days a week. And that really starts to bring in this concept of zero trust. Zero trust is a concept of, we do not trust that endpoint. It has to be verified. It needs to have endpoint technology. It needs to know where it's connecting. We need to verify the user that is on that device before it is allowed to make connections into the network. That is something that we are working on here at Sophos as well. We are bringing out a zero trust networking appliance to tie all of these systems in together to continue to promote that work from home or work from anywhere type of an environment. But absolutely, you have to make sure that you are managing all of these different devices, and that infrastructure is ever changing.
Absolutely. And so as a former MSP, I'm going to pick on you from that perspective. What recommendations do you have for MSPs to leverage what's happening in today's world from a security perspective to be able to get foot in door, to be able to go after new opportunities that are out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been a big question, obviously, for everybody. It's we're in 2020, which is when we were at the thick of this, and the bad guys didn't realize we were all supposed to be at home and being with family, and they were still at work. So really what we had to do is find new ways to go back to our partners, to their customers, and tell them that they cannot just stay, hey, just at Endpoint. And what we found that worked really, really well during the course of the last year and a half now is an opt-out campaign. And this is something absolutely every MSP should do for their environment, for their customer base, to help protect yourself. And what this really means is you should have the best protection, whatever that is. If you're talking Sophos, it's our MTR Advanced that includes our 24/7 monitoring, our endpoints. Have that all bundled in and have that as your primary option. If a customer does not want to go that route, they have to opt out of it, helping taking some of that liability and risk off of you as the MSP. You can always, again, make them sign off on that. Yes, they do not want to go with this level of service. They understand that you have told them that standard AV is not enough, or simply having an endpoint protection out there is not enough. You need to have a security operations layer on top of that is constantly monitoring. And that has been absolutely huge across our MSP base. They've actually found, most of our MSPs have found that they've had about a 90% success rate with that approach. Because a customer, if you tell them, hey, here's all the bad things that could potentially happen, you may need to go into incident response, which is costly. And this is not going to be the responsibility of me, the MSP. I am letting you know what you need to do to protect this. Most of them will not take that risk. They will go ahead and opt in.
Excellent. And, we've been talking a lot about this on our weekly calls, the fact that here we may have already a whole program in place and, whatever security's been added into it. But when there are new, threats, there's new, methods that we need to protect against, we have to put new tools in place. And so some of the concerns were, clients saying, well, shouldn't you already be providing all that? And, ultimately it just, it's a changing environment and we have to introduce new tools, right? So, when you're looking at an existing account versus a new accounts, you can roll in all what your new security stack looks like, but those existing accounts, you're going to have to add in and there might be costs associated with it. And any thoughts in that area as far as, handling it from that angle?
Yeah, it's a very tough conversation. I've been there as an MSP, and the last thing that a customer wants is to see you walking in their door asking for more money, and they've now got to pay more. And we've seen this, and unfortunately, it's been evolving at a very rapid pace. But you saw this shift over the last I'd say 10 years, 5 to 10 years roughly, where it was AV is good enough, and then we had to go to next gen, and okay, now we can't do that. Now it's always something. We need to have MDR where we can have the tools, and now we have to have a service. There's always something to have on a conversation. So anytime you onboard a brand new customer, I would have an honest conversation with them right out the get-go. I mean, obviously those existing customers, you have to go back in again, have those honest conversations of, here's where we were, here's where we are now. But just so you have that level set with a brand new customer you're onboarding to say, hey, this environment is constantly shifting. We do not know where it is going to be 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. We may have to come back, and the techniques that we have deployed today may not be sufficient. So as long as you have that level set inside of there, customer typically, yes, they won't like it because they're having to spend more money. But as long as they've had those conversations, as long as you are being transparent about it as the MSP, and it doesn't feel like they are being taken advantage of, you shouldn't have any problem in the environment.
Right. Yeah, and if you're helping to educate them, that's one of the key things. If you're educating them throughout the process, that's the easiest way to be able to, at one point, say, all right, this is where we need to put some additional tools and security in place, and this is where cost is going to come from it. If you're waiting to educate the client when you say we have to add this stuff, it's too late, and they're going to feel as if you're just throwing something in, you're just trying to sell them something. So I think the key is continued education with each of our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say kind of what we're doing today, where we're We're talking about cybersecurity. We're talking about different tools and techniques. As an MSP, don't take it as just you're that managed service provider. You need to be that trusted advisor. Have these same sort of meetings set up, whether it's a monthly, quarterly basis, just to discuss what are the threats, what are you seeing across your tools to your customers, keeping them in the know. This is what we're needing to move to. We need to do simulated phishing attacks. We need to have, encryption on all devices to protect that data. Whatever the case may be, as long as they understand that you're that trusted advisor, you're also giving out that information. They can come and watch a webinar to understand, hey, just what is my MSP doing? Keeping in constant contact. I think contact is one of the biggest things that over the course of the last year and a half here, we're all probably missing. You're not on site with these customers all the time. So have those webinars, bring them on, let them open it up to questions where they can interact with you.
Excellent. There is one other question from Doug. He wants to know if there's a minimum number of seats for making a purchase.
Just my finger there. One. One.
Just one. Okay.
Yeah. So we don't have any minimums in the environment. So we have two different programs. It's our Sophos Partner Program, which is our termed licensing, 1, 2, or 3 years. Again, minimum being you got to buy one seat to have a product. And we also have our Sophos MSP Flex program, which is a monthly pay-as-you-go usage program. You can deploy whatever tools you want for that month. You can use our phishing simulation tool 1 month, get billed for it, not use it the next following months. There's no usage, you don't get billed for it. If you move up, down inside of the environment, it's all very flexible. But yes, all you need is one, because obviously you need to have our software on something.
Excellent. I believe that is all the questions that we have. I really appreciate the presentation, lots of great information. And, it's just one of the things that in IT, we all know, and we all knew when we got into it, that continuing education is critical. But I think as cybersecurity threats are, we're just getting bombarded with and getting hit hard, we need to put even more emphasis on that continued education for ourselves as well as our clients. So, but with that being said, Steve, thank you very much for your presentation today. And I want to thank all of our audience as well. So everybody will receive an email with a survey, but we will also be sending you an email with a link to the replay of this. So you can rewatch it or share it with other people in your team. And with that, Steve, again, thank you very much for being here today.
Yeah,
appreciate
thank you for having me.
And if anybody has any additional information about Sophos, you can send us an email. If you send an email to office@everythingmsp.com, we'll make sure that the team at Sophos gets that information, and we will go from there. Everybody, thank you. Have a great day, and we will talk to you guys soon. Thank you.